Good evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 137 of Scotonomics. I'm speaking to you from a very wet and damp Dunblane. I hope it's okay where you are at the moment. We've got a really interesting topic to discover tonight, and I think the timing is pretty perfect considering the Community Wealth Bill was passed in Parliament this week. We're going to be looking at a framework that really sets to kind of practically deliver the ideas and the concepts of the Community Wealth Bill, and that's something called the Communities Delivery Framework. And we have the author of that, Stephen Hunter, who will be joining us in a couple of minutes. But first, as always, when I'm lucky enough to have her on the show, is a hello to Karen Van Sweden. Hello, Karen. Nice to see you.
Hello. How's it going?
Yes, all very well here. And you?
Yes, well, our viewers might have heard that Aberdeen has now had rain for 22 days. So, yeah, that's pretty dreary and not good for your psyche, but it's much tougher on the farmers, of course.
Yeah, well, we're here to brighten up everyone's evening. It really is a great day having passed the communities, the Community Wealth Building Bill. But as we said in our Scotonomics newsletter that went out on Monday, we really need to make sure that these words are backed up by deeds. And that starts at the Scottish Government and then works all the way through the organisations who have pledged their support or who are now legally obliged to support that idea. So hopefully you're aware of community wealth building, but I am going to make sure that we don't throw you in at the deep end, because we're going to ask Stephen to explain that concept before he goes in to the framework. But as a short introduction, Scotland's on the verge of a historic shift. The Community Wealth Building Bill, currently processing through the Scottish Parliament, passed, represents an opportunity to reshape the way our communities deliver and benefit from public services. Yet this opportunity comes at a time of persistent underfunding of the public sector, with little sight that traditional financial resources will return to previous levels. Without new community-led strategies, many vital services and community assets risk decline. Well, certainly that's the introduction from the Communities Delivery Framework, and I agree with every single word. I'm really looking forward to delving a lot deeper into this. And to do this, I'm now going to welcome Stephen. Hello, Stephen. How are you doing?
Hello, very well, thank you.
Great. Thanks very much for joining us and for promoting the episode as well. I've seen it on a couple of platforms. We do really appreciate that. It's such a wonderful opportunity for us to be able to get this in front of more people. So thanks for helping us with that. Before we get diving into the details, do you want to just give us a little bit of background about you, Stephen? How did you end up getting involved in the benefits of community wealth building through this idea of the Communities Deliver Framework?
Okay, so my background is predominantly operational. As a youngster, I was working on the St Andrews links, and then I moved off to the bright lights of London to work in luxury hotels. After travelling a bit around Australia and other countries, I've come back to Scotland, learned horticulture, garden design, and started my own business, where I witnessed the race to the bottom. A lot of companies kind of competing with each other. There's not a lot of money about in the economy. Everyone will do it 10% cheaper. You're trying to do things right, you pay your staff well, and develop now. It's a difficult landscape. So I was a bit down after that. I came out and started looking at all the wonderful things that were happening in the world, and thought, right, I'm going to get to my community and learn a bit about those, see what's happening locally. Came out to my community, and there was nothing happening. Nobody was really having conversations. And the places I did go, all I found was the fact that all these community facilities we had were at threat of being closed down. And I kind of saw, right, that was my goal. I suppose started there as like, right, I've got to try and save these local communities. From there, I ended up becoming the manager at Inch House Community Centre, which is a beautiful building in the south of Edinburgh, just behind Cameron Toll. Working alongside the council, which was a bit of a first for them, and it was a difficult arena to be in, but it gave me a real opportunity to see how the council operated, how the community kind of reacted to the community centre with services being taken away rapidly, and how their contractors interacted. There were contractors coming from different parts of Scotland to different jobs. Some, some were subcontracted from the main contractor, and just watching a slow kind of degrading of the facility overall, and then thought, there's a bit of an opportunity here, especially as the community centre was looking to go for community asset transfer, which is part of what community wealth building is. While the committee were looking at, well, how do we go through this process? I was looking at, well, how do we do facilities management? How do we do administration? How do we have events? How do we bring the services back in? And how do we pay for it? So from there, I started patching together a bit of an idea, and that's where Communities Deliver was born.
Fantastic. So you kind of feel like you are, it's come from being in at the deep end of being involved in these types of facilities and institutions that aren't really getting the support. That's a good introduction there. I suppose the next question I'd like to ask is what's wrong with the situation at the moment? What do you see wrong with our economy? Slightly more broader than this degradation of community assets.
So I think it's fair to say that we're moving out of the economic situation that we've been in for the last 50 years. I think it's there's different arguments around about that. I think what we see in different parts of the world, tyranny, etc., is a reaction to people that thought they maybe seen something dying. I think big finance and big business have worked together over that time to sort of snap as much of the economy as they can. Our economy's turned into a service economy. We've seen we were masters. We're seen as, well, maybe not masters of the world, but we were seen as excellent engineers, creators. I've been all the way around Australia, and it was really wonderful to see the amount of Scottish people that were involved with helping put Australia together. I was really proud of that. But yeah, so it's we've kind of changed into a service economy. Everything's been moved offshore. We bring things in. Local authorities have gradually outsourced more and more of their obligations that were previously done in-house to the private sector, who in turn have to make a profit while doing that. The third sector haven't captured and care for the fallout from that. Those things that weren't put through in contracts, and that, they were to take that not through necessity, not through choice. So as we get to, the government's recognised that. They've tried to, through procurement, to try and get SMEs and the third sector involved more, going back to 2012 to the Public Contracts Regulation, 2014 the Procurement Reform Act, but it was still not quite working. We've got to a point where banks are too big to fail, companies too big to compete against. We've got local authorities having to do more with decreasing budgets. And, if you look at elderly and residential care, that's massive, burden on them just now. We've got SMEs that are struggling, as I mentioned earlier on, the race to the bottom. We've got the Scottish Government, which is devising wonderful initiatives, but then often fail to back them up. On the paper it looks amazing, and wait to see what comes from that, and nothing really comes from it. We've got central government. I think they're running a household budget, so they're not really making the best of the opportunities that lie within that. And I think there's just a general lack of vision, like in the mid to long term. It's not, we're always fighting what's happening now and maybe a little into the future. If we look like 2050, it's all about environmental stuff, which is really important. But what are the big things we're aiming for? Let's start creating some dreams and aiming for them, and it's not really happening. But on the backdrop of that, there's this the huge elephant that's growing bigger every week, bigger every day, and that's AI. If estimates are right, the next 10 to 15 years, we're looking at maybe 25 to 40% of jobs that exist now are gone. So how are we addressing that? How are we going to retrain, reorganize, and create new opportunities for what's ahead? Is that community wealth? Is community wealth building? Is guaranteed income part of that? What is it? What are we doing at the minute? We're literally still fighting what's behind, what's been behind us and with us. So what are we doing to fight the future?
Brilliant, and that's certainly a rhetorical question, isn't it? Which we would hope at some point we would have a clearer idea on. So again, so you're absolutely right. There's lots of things that seem immediate, and we're kind of firefighting, which is the day to day. And then we have these grand plans like net zero by 2050, and they're so far in the distance that you actually don't really need to do anything about that. You can kind of tackle that a little bit later. So all the really important stuff in the middle just doesn't seem to be of as equal importance as either of those two things, and certainly in terms of the action as well. But one thing that the Scottish Government is doing is this commitment to community wealth building. So would you like to just give us a brief summary from your perspective of community wealth building?
Yeah, I should say off the back of what I've just said, there are those negative things. I happen to think we're living through one of the most exciting times in human history. We've got this whole new opportunities like opening up a roundabout us, and the community wealth building is part of that. And the bill moving through Parliament is excellent. Great opportunities for communities, for small businesses, an opportunity to kind of rebuild what our economy is, and maybe start to look at what those bigger opportunities are. We hear about energy, manufacturing, and there's different opportunities. So what are they? If we're going to be like, we've more or less moved into the service economy of relying on hospitality. How are we doing that? How are we looking at food sovereignty, and things like that? So community wealth building can be a great part in how communities can continue, if they can organise properly, can come together and do something really special with that. So yeah, I think the bill in itself is really great. Like, I know there'll be a lot of critics saying it doesn't go far enough, and absolutely, we should do better. We should straight away start looking, what the next stage is, how we're going to improve that. What are the things that people have highlighted already that we're going to fall short on, and start to look at how we address those in the future. But we've got a great starting point, and the people that have been working behind that, within the government, within the different organisations, people like Neil McEnroy have done an outstanding job, and we should applaud them all. But let's not kind of sit back and say, okay, that's that done, because it's not. We've got to start, pressure testing it all, and see where we can do better.
Brilliant. Kieran, would you just like to give us a little bit of your thoughts on the community wealth bill as well? And then I think it would be really interesting to hear from you the need for much more kind of community involvement, because obviously your role as a councillor. And then we'll go back to Stephen and get a lot more detail around his community delivery framework.
Yeah, I mean, if you've been following the social media about it, people all over the world are quite excited about the community wealth building bill. And, I met Neil McEnroy in the Blue Gel Hall in 2016, 2017, and heard him talking about the Preston model there, and, was really deeply impressed by it all. And of course, now that, years later, the fruit of that has been born through this bill, which is fantastic. I'm really happy to see all that happen. I guess for me, I work with a lot of volunteers in my area, and some of them have applied for money, given themselves a wage so they can do volunteer, or rather they can work within my ward and help people within my ward. And they're very active, a lot of the people in my ward. They do an awful lot. I guess my standout question to you is, what have you done that you think you could teach them? And I would be wanting you to sell that to them, because I will show them this film afterwards.
I think in general we've settled for mediocrity. Sorry, it's just, we look around and it's just like, well, that'll do. And I think that's a thing of, we have to raise our standards. And I think we've got to look around for the people that we can actually speak to, that can do stuff like that. So you as a councillor, and with the rest of your councillors, you've got some power, but you can only do a lot of the time what you're being asked to do. And there has to be, not just from volunteers, from us all as citizens, like, we have to be pushing government, whether that be local or national, to start doing something better, because they won't do it otherwise, and it's so, I don't think it's not just necessarily down to volunteers. But yeah, for me, as it literally is just a fact that I've looked around and kind of started to try and see the broader picture, like start to see where the what the causes are, rather than always just trying to and deal with the effects of that. And if we can kind of dial it back to those points, then we can start, each and every community can start to build something better. I think when you look at kids that are playing up in the area, like we get loads of kids tearing around Edinburgh on dirt bikes or on electric bikes and stuff. Well, let's wind back and actually see why they're doing that. It was because they've nothing to do. So can we create as communities, as opportunities to get them out to places where they can ride them? Let's get that energy out of them. So let's satisfy what they're doing. Or with anything, like, let's go back and look at what the source is and try to actually start to deal with that, rather than us always having to fight the effects that hit us.
I'm going to take you to a specific example that you've put in the paper, which is the creation of cooperatives or local cooperatives, which is obviously a really important vehicle for a local area to compete with national or even international companies. as well. And so, I think this is a really important idea. And, it's getting people to find the time to put the initial things in motion, which often requires volunteering. But, potentially you could then eventually build up a cooperative, which is going to then pay people, etc. Have you done this within your community centre? And what have you learned from this so far as success with procurement?
So this kind of came back when I had my landscaping company. We're really struggling to deal in domestic markets. So I decided to look into procurement. I went along to all the training schemes. On the last, the government were running training about what procurement was and how you do it. And the last one, I was sitting next to a guy who's come up from Dumfries, and we got chatting, and he said, "Well, like, who do you? What your background? What's your business?" And I said, "Oh, like, small business, 5 people, we're landscapers." And he laughed and he said, "What chance have you got against a company like the one I work for?" He said, "My job is to go after these contracts," which really wound me up. And actually, I shut down my company just off the back of that. So going into to the community centre, and it was, when I saw these other companies coming forward and doing different services, and I kind of, realised, well, actually, these companies are just joining the same procurement process as the rest. But if we're gonna compete with these companies, then we've got, national companies often, we've got to start acting like them. And that's the problem with community groups, is they're alone. Like, I think, like with Thatcher, she kind of turn us all into individuals, and within our communities, it's all these groups, and they've often got, they've got their specified kind of reach of what they're trying to do. But outside of that, it's very difficult for others to get in. So it's like, well, how do I create something we can all kind of work together? And to get people involved, I think you've got to do one of 4 things. So you've either got to make life easier, make life better, save the money, or make the money. And if you can hit one or more of those with an idea with somebody, then they'll change what they'll do, and they'll actually get involved. When you're looking at community groups, sometimes, if you look at our community centre, people wouldn't get involved. And, often they say, well, why would they? There's nothing for them. There's no youth work, there's no groups, we'd have like events here and there. But day to day, if you want people to give up their time, then you've got to be giving them something back. And that's why it was important for me with these corporates I was doing, national entities controlled locally, and the profits, the operational dividends, the extra dividends go back into the communities. So that
let's take a stop there. No problem, because I just feel like we've jumped into you explaining a little bit about the framework. So I think it's important for us to kind of just stop now and say, we've all identified the problem here. You've come up with what looks like a very good framework for some of the solutions, and this is a communities deliver framework. Now, we're going to have a link to this. It's not a huge document either. I mean, it's very detailed. It covers lots of areas. It's only around about 30-40 pages, but with big font and nice pictures, so it'll only take you half an hour to get through, and I do thoroughly recommend that you do that. So you've got this framework, Stephen. I'm going to encourage everyone to look at it, but would you like to just give a brief summary? We've explained where we are. There's a need for it, especially there. You mentioned about the problem with scale. It's so difficult for smaller companies to get in to procure from providers. What's your framework, and how does that help?
Okay, so Communities Deliver is essentially a flexible modular toolkit. Offers solutions and services to individuals, communities, the third sector, the public sector, and the private sector, both for small businesses and for large. It'll kind of a lot of people think I'm trying to sort of attack bigger companies, and I'm not. We can offer them a lot, overall. So there's 2 tiers to this. The first tier is a series of 12 workers' cooperatives, national entities, locally controlled. Those dividends are paid to the workers, and the surplus are then paid back into wealth funds of the communities they were earned in. That means that if a community is providing more of the workers, which are often poorer communities, that means they're getting a legitimate income into their communities to do whatever they want, whether that be, add new services like youth work, where they want to make improvements. That fund sits there and they can do whatever they want with it. So it's a service provider. It's an employment agency for all the different specialties that they're covering, their training body, and their volunteer management. or managers, sorry. I intend them to be procurement experts and leaders of outcomes. So we want to be setting the standards for other procurement contractors to be, coming up to. I think a lot of contractors sometimes, perhaps they are so large that, and because of things like clerks or works have been taken out of councils, that maybe the standards are not as good as they should be. So let's look at that, because we can monitor that as communities. If we're not happy with work that's coming in, we can stand up to the council and their other contractors and say, if that's not as good as this, then they've got to do it better. They've got to come back and finish it. And I've got loads of anecdotes about that with the community centre and round about. We offer services to communities all over Scotland, but we don't look to come in as like, right, we're here, we'll take over, tell us what you need and we'll do it. That's not what this is about. This is about us coming into communities and helping them.
And just to clarify, Stephen, when you say services, what services do you mean?
So services, do you want to go through some of the cooperatives so people can get an idea of what those are?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, cool. So we've got facilities management, so covering a wide range of things, and that's in any modern society, it runs on facilities management. If you can go to any city in the world, any country in the world, they are running some sort of facilities management, and that with cities and stuff all run the same essentially. This is not rocket science. There's nothing new. Sure that things are evolving, but ultimately, cities pretty much run the same. So the first, facilities management. The second is elderly services and social care.
Sorry, Stephen, again. And that is what type of services is facilities management?
Oh, so everything from janitorial, so like security buildings, cleaning, works like joinery, electrical, plumbing, fixing glass. You can put like grounds maintenance to that as well, although we do have another element that could fold into. So it's basically all the things it takes to run a building, essentially.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, so we've got elderly services and social care. So that's looking at, first of all, how with elderly services, there's a lot of communities having to do it. There's a lot of council works and there's private companies taking care of that. So let's try to sort of merge that together, because our elderly are getting, older and older, and the kind of, people, the amount of elderly people is growing. So we've got to start looking at this, because who can afford elderly social care just now? As soon as you get over a certain age, the council, obviously, if they're providing services, they're looking to take it. If you go into residential care, that's incredibly expensive. So let's look at a different way of doing that. Social care as well, there's an enormous burden on the councils, but at the same time, and on the third sector, there's an enormous opportunity to collaborate on these things, to give each individual a better experience, so that they're leading a better life from cradle to grave. We should be looking after our own and making sure, rather than just like, you've got to a certain age, you're not working anymore, so you're not much use. We'll take you out once a week and you'll get a wee lunch and play dominoes and that's your lot. It shouldn't be, like when we were at House, I took over the elderly care. We got a bus. I'm not the kind of guy who's going to sit around and play cards and play dominoes and have a cup of tea. So we used to go out all over, and it was great. We used to go to museums, galleries, beaches, just out for a drive sometimes, and they'd all have a little natter in the back of the bus. But each week you could see them actually becoming brighter and brighter. I was getting lots of amazing comments from their families saying that it literally changed their outlook on life. They really look forward to the days they come out. So, we can do this. We've got the opportunity to do this. We've got the facilities. Let's do it. So the next one is children and youth services. We know that youth services have been cut quite a lot. Through this Community Wealth Fund, we can look to do better. The way I would see it is, if we can get better control of our community around about us, and we have a community wealth fund, then let's start to do that, because youth work is incredibly important on all different ways. And I'd really like to link up youth work with school work, so they can run projects in the summertime, and in the wintertime when they're on holidays. Let's link them up with big businesses. If they're looking to attract children that come out of school to work for them, well, let's attract them into the kind of jobs they want to be doing. So let's have relevant projects that we can run alongside the schoolwork, so they can see if they're doing certain projects in maths, whatever, what that actually means on the ground, the job.
Yeah, well, to say we're certainly getting the scope of what you're kind of encompassing, which is really large. You just want to kind of just very briefly give us the other ones, because I'm really
sure.
keen. I'm really keen to hear from Kieran in this kind of like, if this works, how would this work in Aberdeen as a councillor? What would you think the local authority would be interested in? So just
okay, I'll run
through the last one, Stephen.
Yeah, I'll run through this. Okay, so you got gardens and green spaces. That's essentially looking after horticulture. If we can take control of the parks, etc., from the council and run it as a community entity, I think we can do a lot better. Streets and neighbourhoods, that's all the things you see around and about, keeping things clean, making sure the bins are empty, looking after like things like traffic wardens. Why don't we run the contract for traffic wardens, which is an enormous contract to the councils throughout Scotland, and look for those little attention to details bits that are often missed. Venue management. So we have lots of organisations in the third sector struggle to manage a venue in all different ways. So we order out a list of services. We can do full encompassing taking over, or we can do individual servicing, which could just be marketing on online. We've got events and hospitality management in an event city. If we're looking at the city as a whole, more and more is going towards events and hospitality. So let's become the world leaders. We've got enormous opportunity, especially through the tools we can create through community wealth building. So let's go for that. Waste management, there's different elements to that. One is, it's enormously important how we deal with waste. And I don't think, and I think there's lots of backing for this, that we're not quite dealing with waste as good as we could be. As you look in the city centre, there's lots of private companies going with enormous trucks in the low emission zone, and they're picking up a couple of bins in that street, going another 2 streets, picking up another bin, and there's lots of them. I mean, there's so many enormous vehicles going around. Let's look at how we can rearrange that. Not take business from these companies. Let's just rearrange how it's done, so it's all done a bit more efficiently. We've got construction and community design, which helps to increase the quality on new homes, because I don't think it's fair that someone buys a new home and it's a bit of a Russian roulette, whether they're going to have problems that are hiding away or whatnot. And community design as well. I don't think our new schemes are designed with communities in mind. They're all designed individually. So let's look at being able to play a part in that overall. Temporary structures, that's everything from gazebos for an event to structures for construction, which, as you see in the plan, I want to, if we're looking on rebuilding parts of the Highland, well, let's look at creating holiday parks from these afterwards. And then last one is civils and drainage. We all know the problems with potholes, with cycle lanes, with trip hazards on the pavements, and as well, if we're going to really make an effort of new roads and stuff up the Highlands and creating new communities, then we're going to have to start training people who live up there to actually do this for us. So that's all 12 of the operatives.
Well, very well done, and I think it is really important for us to kind of you've just encapsulated the whole why this is such a good framework, because it is looking at absolutely everything that communities would be involved in. Okay, Kieran, imagine that was a pitch to Aberdeen City Council. What would your initial response be, and then maybe and I know you'd be up with this, throw a few challenging questions Stephen's way. Hopefully you're up for it as well, Stephen. Absolutely. But go for it, Kieran. What do you think?
Okay, so what you're suggesting is a lot of the things that the council does already. I think what's important here is to be realistic about what can happen within the community. So, for example, yes, the first 3 things that spring to mind are in my communities are facilities management. I think that's entirely possible to create a cooperative that does that, facilities management. So cleaning the large buildings in my area, doing the gardening, and also perhaps actually looking after the hygiene of the area as well, and keeping that local too. So I definitely can see the possibility of creating a cooperative that could do that, and you could employ people locally to do that.
Kieran,
that's a possibility. But when you're going towards things like potholes, roads like that, you're going to need a lot of really heavy plant. You're not going to want that. You're going to need big workshops to maintain that. So I think there are certain things where size is better, And I think there are certain things where small is better. And I think the small better is where you want to start first. So what I want to know from you is, have you started a cooperative at your community centre, and what does it do?
No, so I'm not with the. I left the community centre to try and tackle this as well. My partner runs a business, so I was helping her open shops and stuff. So I kind of took time out to kind of get my head round about this. Do I want to go for it? And I got off. Decided absolutely would give it a go, and off I went. When it comes to the structure I've just read out all those 12 cooperatives, I personally have got no control over where this plan goes once it's launched. It's up to the people around about us. It's up about like how do we create, what do they want, because it's not about me. This is going to be a democratic process. It's about getting people involved to see what it is they want. You're absolutely right about potholes and stuff, but I wouldn't suggest that that's done at a macro community level. You're absolutely right. They will need to park places to look after these vehicles and all the rest of it. But if you're taking over council facilities, so say just now they've got a depot on the train line as you're coming out of Haymarket, you'll see there's a depot there, and they've got various depots round and about. These things all exist already. And the fact of the matter is, these operations, whether they be provided by the public sector, the private sector, or the third sector, they're already being produced by our communities in one way or another.
I mean, fundamentally, your council is your community. It's
yeah.
It's how. What do you think that needs to be more localized? That's currently so in Aberdeen. Obviously, we have a council in Aberdeen. It's 7,500 people are employed by Aberdeen City Council. But me and William are both very much fans of subsidiarity. And, for example, with my community councils and other voluntary bodies within my area, if I see funding coming up that is emailed to me, I just forward it on to them, because they will then in turn apply for those funds. Mm-hmm. What I'm trying to work out is it then better for some things that they just form a cooperative, and then they don't have to keep applying for funds, and they create the wealth themselves. And that's what I'm trying to work out, if that's a better way to go for certain things. But is this the Scottish Government then going to create another separate fund for community councils to then apply for things like this, where they're going to create really local entities that are going to deal with really local problems?
Okay. So I think it's there's a lot of pressure on third sector when it comes to funding, because each time a fund comes up, everyone's jumping on it, and
yes, I'm very aware of that.
Trying to apply for those, and the people who receive them are looking through 100. I think the last fund I put in from, I got let back saying there was 100 applicants for it. So it's a real tough battle, and I think we need to try and change what that is, just so we're not wasting so many people's time. And at the same time as well, I saw Paul Lawrence of the City of Edinburgh Council saying a lot of his team spend time going after central government contracts, building parks and stuff, and they're wasting their time doing that. So it's a nightmare. So as far as the model I've got here, so if it's, say, your community, and say they want to go after facilities management, and so communities level would come up to them and say, well, what it is that you're trying to create within here? What contracts are you going after? What other demands do you have in your area? What other things are already going on? Because there's already third sector organisations that employ cleaners and stuff. There's local contracts in hospitals and all the rest of it. So let's look at kind of an area roundabout and just see what we can start to grow from that. But if you're going after procurement contracts, I mean, there's lots and lots of money when it comes to facilities management. And I'll stick a bit of a irony alert as the fact of, if you look at the fact the Scottish government building, St Andrew's House in Edinburgh, and the Scottish Parliament are actually cleaned by an English company called Mighty, and they, when that one company through the Scottish purse gets between 60 and 90 million pounds of income every year. Now, obviously, there's operational costs. Some of that money is staying in Scotland for workers and stuff, but that's a lot of money that we can be claiming back. So the people that are working for them, it's just about changing who they're working for and start to build that ability around communities, so they can actually start to then look at what the bigger opportunities are. They can start going for private sector contracts, start to create that community wealth fund, so they can start to fund themselves in many ways. but then start to collaborate with others, because they'll find lots of other organisations round about them where there's overlaps. So let's look at the efficiency of actually how we're producing certain things, and how money is spent from grants and such like. So
Stephen, I just want to pull out, if I can, because we're in a lot of the detail here, which is incredibly interesting. But I wanted to mention how this links to the Scotland's sectorial balances. And Scotland's sectorial balances effectively just show the financial flows within the Scottish economy, and they show how much money is spent by the government, which includes Westminster and local government and Scottish government. And effectively where that money goes, how much goes into the non-domestic private sector, which is kind of households and businesses, and then how much of that financial flow goes abroad, or the ownership of those pounds goes abroad. And over the last 25 years, there's only been 3 years there's been 7 years over the last 25 years where the private sector has been able to, what we say, net save. So that means as the Scottish public sector, private sector as a whole, households and businesses has been able to net save. It's generally a good thing for people to be able to net save, right? Because it means you're actually building up a little bit of savings. But what you're doing within this framework is trying to strengthen the sectorial balance position of the non-government sector, which is households and businesses. And this is incredibly important from a macroeconomic perspective. So I know all of this stuff is really useful and crucial, and maybe even life-saving for people who are earning money and who have more jobs in communities, but it actually plays a really important role within a macroeconomic framework, because we're supporting the households and businesses. And what you're effectively doing, and as a short summary and how that interacts, is using the example that you said about Mighty. Now, let's say 70% of that money is operational and goes into the community. 30% of it, or maybe at facilities management, is maybe more like 12% profit, because I know these aren't hugely profit-laden sectors, but 10% of that money is going out of Scotland. It's leaving, it's going to England, but it could also be going to a whole host of other places. And this really weakens Scotland's sectorial balances, because that money has to come from the public purse or from the Scottish private sector. And that changes how we manage our economy. And it's fundamental that people understand that when institutions spend, it should be an utmost priority for them to make sure that as little of those funds leak out of the Scottish economy as possible. And this is, as I said, hugely interesting at a micro position, but we also need to expand that and think about, well, what's the role of foreign direct investment? Because what could happen, and I'm sure is the case, a lot of these companies who are providing services for local authorities aren't just based in England, they're based in France or America or Germany, or they're owned by asset management firms and hedge funds, and there's a huge amount of money that leaks out the Scottish economy every year. And it's actually approximately around £11.5 billion. £11.5 billion leaks out of the Scottish economy every year. So these are huge issues. That's money that should be circulating within Scottish businesses and within Scottish households. So this might seem like quite a kind of small and micro kind of framework, but it fits beautifully with not only community wealth building, but a much wider and deeper understanding of how our economy works and the importance of these kind of financial flows. So I was hugely supportive when I read it, but I just wanted to give that little bit of a kind of macro framework why this is so important. Is that an argument or a discussion you're aware of, Stephen?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you look at the fact that the City of Edinburgh Council they have their hard facilities management currently dealt with by Skanska, so it's a Swedish company, and they're backed by Mighty to provide these services. Part of that is like, can we get a share of that? But I'm not saying we get rid of all these big companies. Like, we need these big companies, especially in the short term. We've got an environment that's set up with them. So, and if we've got all these big dreams of these enormous infrastructure projects, we're going to need companies like that. But the more that we can start to grow our own capacity to do that, the less we're going to require companies from abroad, and the more money we can generate within the economy and through through the government creating money through modern monetary theory and stuff, MMT. We should be trying to create that capacity, because why not? A lot of the time it is just someone from the outside that's either funding it or organising it, and then using Scottish workers to produce these things. Yeah. So there is definitely a macro element to it.
Brilliant. I did notice, and I did like in your 40-page document, that at no point did you use the phrase taxpayers' money, and you used public money. So I thought that was very MMT aligned. So I do appreciate that. Although unfortunately in Scotland, when the Scottish government does spend, it is spending taxpayers' money, because it's not creating its own currency. But it was really good to see that. Well, certainly I think it's really important that we start with the ideas that you've got from the framework, and then kind of build out to that the huge impact that it can have on our microeconomy. My next question for you is, where do we go from here? I encourage everyone to read the framework. I think it's really interesting. I'd like to maybe spend a wee bit of time with you, just seeing if I could help you on a couple of areas, or certainly give my opinion on a couple of areas, because I do think it's a really strong proposal. Where do you go from here, Stephen?
So there's lots of people and organisations involved, kind of along the lines of what I do. If you look at like the Edinburgh's Future Institute, they're looking at like, well, how to redesign public services, and the Hunter Institute's working in Clackmannanshire Council on the public services. There's other organisations that are looking to change how public service is delivered. So there's collaboration opportunity here. Like I'm not saying this is the perfect model. What I'm saying is, use this as a bit of a starting point. Let's, open up a conversation with others. So for me, I would really like to, there's an opportunity right now on the ground in Edinburgh, because the City of Edinburgh Council are now asking every single community centre in Edinburgh is being put out to the communities, and they're saying, we'd like you to run them. Can you take them over? So there's a massive opportunity for facilities management in there. And then the things that roll off the back of that, like events, and all these kind of different things, venue management, we can start just to get the seeds of those and just start to try them out. So I'd really like to open up a conversation with the executive team. Paul Lawrence, if you're watching, or in the executive team, give me a shout. There'll be a campaign going out soon, I believe, hopefully to the councillors of Edinburgh. I want to get, send a blanket kind of document to them, so they can start to try and get behind it. Because it is just me. I get no funding for this. This is totally my own back. I work part-time in my partner's shop to try and, just to keep me going, which barely gives me enough money. So I would love to do this full-time. I'd love for an organisation to come forward and say, we can get you to the right people. Maybe they want to support me for a few months until we can kind of work out where this is going. And like I say, there's an incredible opportunity for collaboration between third sector funders and major ones. And when I say that, like, this is not just about digging a hole and throwing money in it. This is about, if we can get this going, it actually generates income. So let's do it. Universities and colleges, let's get them involved. Let's co-produce this thing with local authorities. I don't want to be working against anybody. This should, everybody sees there's benefit to this, and let's get rocking on it.
What about the community development funds? I'm trying to remember the organisation, but yeah, the Association of Community Development Trusts.
So I don't know that one, to be honest. I feel around, because there's not a lot of, when you're an individual come up with a social economic proposal, there ain't a lot of funding about for that. And you can try as you might to try and twist and bend kind of other funds into it, but it's really difficult. So it is going to take, CEOs of some of the big funders to say, let's have a look at that. Even like the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, they put their poverty report every year. Yeah. I could crack it at addressing that.
Yeah. I definitely think the Development Trust Association Scotland is worth you looking at, because I think they're doing some of this, and I think your framework would fit really well with the work that they do, which is to effectively they're the association for community trusts, community development trusts in Scotland.
So I have actually spoken to a couple of those. One was a trustee a while back, and he was saying, I can't help you. And I have spoken to someone recently, but that was more in line with operational and kind of, would you support this as an organisation? Because obviously they've got people who are trying to take community asset transfers and all sorts of types of building. And the big problem they've got is, the same as what I was looking at community centres. How do you run it? How do you make money? There's all these different problems. And if you can't their thing probably is if you can't do it, then it's dangerous for you to take on.
Yeah. Karen and I interviewed their chief exec last year, and she was saying one of the issues was that the communities are taking on these big assets, but they're taking them on themselves.
Yeah.
And there is a lack of ability to spread that risk. And it is that matter of scale. So I do think that the framework's really useful. I just wanted to kind of end my part with a little anecdote, because I was reading your paper and it jumped out and it said, Communities Deliver would initially propose the addition of 3 new criteria in the procurement scoring process. So very briefly, is my understanding, what happens is you pitch to a local authority and you say, we would love to do this. And they say, okay, we're going out to tender. We'll look at 10 tenders and we've got a little scorecard. I'm probably simplifying it slightly. And it says, okay, you've got 5 points because you've got 100 people and you're paying pensions. Great. You've got 3 points because you're doing X, Y, and Z. And then at the bottom of it, it scores everyone's tender, and then maybe you move to the next stage. But there's certainly a kind of scoring process. And what you've suggested is actually, if everyone added the proximity to location as being a big thing that scored, the community benefits from the profits would be a big thing that had a lot of points, and also the employee training and development programs. If you do these 3 things, then you're scored really highly. And that jumped out at me because last year, or the end of 2024, I helped an organisation in Dundee pitch for the Dundee Christmas and New Year fairs, the shows right in the centre of Dundee. And I spent quite a bit of work, because my background before doing all of this was events. So I spent a little bit of time with them, and then we did a lot of work putting through the proposal. And they should have won it. Clearly they should have won it, because they were offering a lot cheaper rides. They were offering free rides to people who were on poorer people in the community. They were putting some of the profits back into the community. It was a wonderful project, but it scored terribly because the framework that was used didn't value the proximity to location, the community benefits, or the employee training. I mean, we're talking about teaching people how to run events and then have them run more events. And for me, it was just, I was thinking, if that was there, those wonderful people in Dundee would have won that event, and it would have been a much better position for everyone in Dundee. And I'm thinking it's just such a shame that we don't have that at the moment. So I really think there's a huge benefit in a new approach to procurement and how our institutions are sourcing the products and the services. So I really do wish you the best. And as I said offline, I'm happy to help maybe a few people that I can put you in touch with, as well as helping out a little bit, or certainly giving my advice on the proposal as it stands. But I did want to get you on the show because I think it's fantastic, and I'm very impressed that you're doing this part-time, and we need more people like you, because you have created something I think is of huge benefit. Before you start blushing, Stephen, I'll ask Karen if you want to say anything before we finish.
Yeah, I think that the example of Mighty cleaning the Scottish Parliament is a really good example. You can't tell me that people in Edinburgh can't clean. So why are we using a company that's not based in Edinburgh to clean the Parliament, right? That's craziness. I'd say there's certain things that you might have to bring in outside contractors to do, because the skill sets aren't necessarily in your city or in your village or town or whatever. Completely understand that. That makes sense. But cleaning, come on. Yeah, I don't understand that. So my first step I'd say, you need to be contacting your local MSP. You need to be contacting your local councillors and tell them how they're going to start changing that situation, because that should not be happening. I know that in Aberdeen City, we do try to procure locally as much as possible. That is something that's in our mindset already, is local procurement. But what you're talking about is the creation of given the communities themselves empowerment through creating of cooperatives. And I think that is the starting point. And what I would say to William is, he has a skill set. He could create a cooperative that creates events. He could mentor other people into how to do that. And that's your starting point. You've got people who know how to do this, and then they start that cooperative, and then they get going with it, and they create something through their own expertise to start off with. And I'm thinking within my area, I'm going to talk to my community council about this more, and look at maybe working out what the skill sets are in the area, and finding out that would be my starting point with this. But I think it's definitely something from this interview and from your paper that I'm going to go off to my local community councils and talk to them about. Definitely.
Yeah, and don't forget, everyone, like in Scotland, the elections are coming up soon. You're going to have all these political people who are standing for election coming to your door, ask, put it to them, just say you've heard about this.
That is me. I am a politician. So
yeah.
It's my responsibility to represent the people in my area. So
Indeed.
yeah, but it's also that I interact with them and try to make their lives better through bringing ideas as
Absolutely.
well. Yeah,
I certainly think this is good enough to start from a position where it could it could be something you would find in a political party's manifesto. There is you have done a really good job, Stephen, and all power to you. And Kieran, to pick up on your point, that's exactly what I tried to do in Dundee. We tried to say this will be a cooperative, we'll set everything up, but without any kind of support or funding from the local authority, it makes it really difficult. And this is why it is really important. It's a bit kind of the horse and cart, isn't it? Where goes first. But all power to you, Stephen, and best of luck with it. Thanks so much for joining. Jeff, go for it.
As far as I can see, literally everything we need already exists. Like, it's just a matter of just arranging what's there. The organisations that can help. There's government officials. There's a community health building bill. Like, it's all there. We've just got to do it. And in relative terms, this is pretty easy. Like, it's not difficult. Let's just get the right people in the right place, around the right table, and just start getting this sorted out. We can really make something like this fly.
Brilliant. Even there is someone who's watching has said, can you please pass on my email address to Stephen? So I'll drop that in now, and I said, I think we've both agreed to help you best we can. Hopefully, if anyone else is watching, please do. Stephen, how do people get in touch with you?
You can do stephen.hunter@communitiesdeliver.co.uk. Please be aware. There's a website, domain. It's been bought. There's no website yet. It is coming soon. Just be mindful. It is just me. I need kind of direct help at the minute. I can't deal with people saying, "Oh, I want you to come and look at this and stuff." I can't do this yet. It's just, I need someone to help me get to the next level, and then I can start coming out and actually giving that help.
Great. Well, best of luck. Hopefully,
thank you.
Thanks again for joining us, Stephen.
Excellent.
Bye for now. Oh, hopefully, will we see you at the Scotonomics Economics Festival?
Absolutely will. Yeah, I was going to think about putting on an event. I'm not sure that's going to happen because you've actually got such an amazing lineup of people. I don't think I want to miss out. But you'll definitely be there. I'll be there. You'll see me for sure.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. Cheers, Stephen. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, Kieran, wasn't it really refreshing to have such a motivated person, but also something so kind of unique and detailed to what's going on in Scotland at the moment?
Well, I mean, I have to say that as a councillor, I meet a lot of people that are motivated in my ward. So, that's something that I encounter a lot, and I recently just wrote for the local magazine and just said, that some of the casework that I have to do is very difficult sometimes and quite upsetting. But, meeting the volunteers that I meet on a regular basis really reminds you that, the world is a good place and lots of good people doing good things. So, I've got a lot of people already in my ward doing lots of good stuff for the community. Absolutely. But, I've certainly got some ideas from Stephen and what he was saying. And I think with the bill, what will happen is that money will be directed towards community wealth building, and those people who are motivated within my areas will be able to apply for the money with the idea for community wealth building. But, fundamentally, it is crazy that we're implying Mighty to do the cleaning for the Parliament. Yeah, this is a really bad example of what not to do, because a percentage of that money is going to leave Scotland. It's not coming back, and that's exactly what we don't want. We want more money to be retained in our community.
Absolutely. And I think the Scottish Government's job is to set the example for all of the other institutions in the UK.
Absolutely.
And I think it can do that in so many ways. Kieran, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I hope everyone enjoyed that show. Please do let us know any comments. Thanks for a couple of questions. And as I said, I'll put the link to the document. I'll probably have to upload it to the Scotonomics website, because as Stephen said, he doesn't have a website at the moment, but I'll upload it there and you can download it. Thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Bye for now. If you're enjoying this episode of the Scotonomics podcast, please consider joining us on Patreon with a paid subscription for as little as £3 per month. Your support will ensure we can continue to create this podcast. Find the link in the show notes or head over to patreon.com/Scotonomics. Also, please do like, share and comment on this podcast.